So I will be your moderator today. And just to start us off, as we sort out a few technical issues, I am going to introduce our organizers for this webinar. So this webinar, Empower Her series, is organized by Ariel for Africa in partnership with Ghana Startup Network, which is basically, Ariel for Africa is a leading social enterprise headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya, and it is driven by a zeal in the quest to provide business skills, connection to funding opportunities, and business networks to budding entrepreneurs in Africa. While Ghana Startup Network operates along a similar trajectory, nurturing entrepreneurial ventures and entrepreneurs through the establishment of a national startup ecosystem. This webinar series, Empower, is a 3-week series that is geared towards empowering women to explore the many avenues of entrepreneurship, as well as charge them with a vision of change. The webinar features powerful women across Africa who will share their wealth of expertise and experience in their respective ventures. So today's series, or today's part, is part 2. It is the second part of the 3-part webinar, and it is entitled Navigating Through Funding for Women-Led Ventures. And it will take 1 hour. And just to introduce our speakers for today, we have on board Wawira Njiru and Roseanne Wali, and just a brief on what their ventures are all about. Just give me a moment, I get their briefs. So Roseanne Wali is a CEO with HL Venture Partners. She's based in Nairobi and leads all aspects of HL strategic and operational activities. She brings over a decade of direct experience investing in Africa and building financial institutions. Prior to assuming the CEO role, Roseanne led investments in East Africa and Southern Africa, providing active post-investment portfolio support. And before HL, Roseanne worked for Infraco Africa, where she focused on investing in distributed solar PV mini grids. And before that, she joined AgDevco as its second employee, helping it to build it into a leading Pan-African agri-investor. Her role at AgDevco culminated in 3 years of Mozambique as country manager, sitting on the board of numerous agricultural companies, structuring deals, and overseeing 22 investments across multiple value chains. Roseanne has degrees from University of York and the London School of Economics, and holds an advanced qualification in finance. The other co-host, the other panelist for today's webinar is Wawira Njiru. Is the executive director and founder for Food for Education. She's a trained nutritionist in using cutting-edge technology and innovation to feed the future of Africa, unlocking the potentials of hundreds of millions of young people. Food for Education provides affordable, highly nutritious meals to public primary school children to improve their nutrition and educational outcomes. They use technology to source from smallholder farmers, cook centrally, and distributed hot, nutritious, high-quality, and low-cost lunches. Parents use mobile money to prepay for each meal through their innovative tap-to-eat technology. Their contributions are topped up to virtual wallet linked to NFC wristbands, and that kids use to tap to eat in under 5 seconds. Wawira is a recipient of the University of South Australia Alumni Award 2017, a 2018 Reina Arnold Fellow, a recipient of the Builders of Africa Award 2018, and one of 2018's top 40 under 40 women in Kenya. She's also the first recipient of the Global Youth Leadership Prize 2018, presented by Cisco, a Ford Foundational Global Fellow, and was named as OK Africa's 100 Women. She's also a member of the Kenyan government's National School Meals and Nutrition Steering Committee. So today we have very experienced people on board with us today, and we are looking forward to the conversations and the sharing from their own experiences. Without further ado, and to save as much time as possible to have a very interactive quick Q&A, I am going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves, to further introduce themselves and to give us a brief on what they have prepared for us today. So I am going to start with Wawira, the Executive Director and founder of Food for Education. So Wawira, take it away.
Thank you, Aaron. And I'm excited to be here and to speak to all of you, everyone who's attending, my co-panelist, Roseanne, and the entire team at Ariel Africa. I think that's one of the topics, one of the things about this topic is that it's very close to my heart, because I think that fundraising is one of the key challenges that a lot of founders go through in terms of launching their companies. And sometimes it is a do or die. A lot of times it is a do or die for a lot of companies. So I think that especially I'm very passionate about women. I'm very passionate about Black women raising money. And so it's a topic very close to my heart. So as Aaron has given a very good bio about me, I'll kind of give a personal perspective about what my journey has been, especially through the fundraising lens. And as I said, a Black woman, I also would mention that I started my organization at 21 years old. So it's also a very, it's a perspective around being a young person, which I think a lot of people in terms of fundraising as a young person can be very intimidating. So that lens as well. So a bit of history that probably wasn't in the bio, or personal stories, that I started the organization, as I said, when I was 21 years old. I started it I was doing my undergrad, started it with $1,250, which is 125,000 shillings that I raised from friends. I made essentially, so I grew up in Kenya, I am Kenyan through and through, and really wanted to do something about, a lot of us who grew up in Kenya, upper middle class, or you're, in the poverty line, you're always thinking, how can I make life better for myself, and how can I make life better for people around me? So I grew up very conscious about how can I make life better for myself and my family, but also how can I make life better for myself, for other people around me. So I grew up in a small town, here in Ruiru, here in Kenya, it's called Ruiru. Went to schools I say my parents could barely afford, just because they wanted to give me a good education. And when I was, I did primary school, high school here, and my university, I went to Australia, and that's when I started the organization when I was 21 years old. I doing different things. I don't really know what are you really passionate about, what do you actually want to do, and I think that for me, the direction took, I did a lot of volunteering from, for example, a cancer center for different areas. And then finally, when I was doing my undergrad in nutrition, I realized that I was really passionate about food, and I was very passionate about children's growth. So as I said, started with 1,250, raised that, and dollars, so 125,000 shillings, and started feeding 25 kids with that. So over the years, this was in 2012, over the years, we've grown. I moved back home. Obviously, I'm in Nairobi. Finished my undergrad, moved back home. I started working full-time on my organization. And one of the biggest things in terms of being a founder of an organization is the responsibility of raising money is essentially yours at the beginning, and even continuously. You maintain the first relationship with funders. You cultivate that relationship. For example, on our team, we have someone who works full-time in fundraising, but their role mostly is to support me in fundraising. So they help in terms of, if we're writing for a grant, I'll do the first initial contact, and they'll do the admin, for example, writing the actual grant or making something, writing it in the due diligence part, submitting the documents and things like that. So in my journey, one of the things that I've summarized my points in terms of what I think has been the most useful piece of advice that I would give that has helped me. Now, I think that if you're going into fundraising as someone who looks like me, sounds like me, is from somewhere like me, a lot of times you're at a disadvantage, because a lot of times you're going probably to a white person, because we don't have many philanthropists here who give out money, and you are going with a cultural difference, you're going with a color difference, sometimes you're going with a sex difference in terms of your different gender, you're going with a lot of differences. So I think for me, my first thing that really helped me is to know my stuff. So I really took time to kind of like really understand our company and really understand what we do. So I live and breathe food for education, in the sense that you can wake me up in the middle of the night and you ask me something about our KPIs or our metrics, and I'll be able to answer that. So that is really important in terms of, a lot of people say you have to be twice as good. So you have to be like 3 times as good or 4 times as good to be able to receive funding. So we've moved. One of the things that I think has been very useful for me in terms of building credibility has been really knowing the landscape, really knowing what it takes to feed kids in Kenya, really understanding, really taking time to dig deep, really understanding the numbers. How many kids are in Kenya? How much do you have capacity to feed? How much is your goal? So your scaling plan. So knowing your stuff is really important. That's one of my tips. The other tips that I would give is around persistence. I think that a lot of times people start organizations thinking, I'll start off and then someone will just give me $10,000. The next person will give me $100,000, and then the next person will give me $1 million. And these are just 3 people you're going to meet on the street, and they'll give you that money. But the reality is that's not how it works. I said we started in 2012. It's now 2020, and we're still raising money. And in terms of persistence, I think that one of the things is making sure that you keep knocking on doors. You don't give up knocking on doors, and you don't give up talking about the same thing over and over and over again. For me, it's been about feeding kids. And right now is when people, will listen and say, this is actually an important thing. But I'll tell you, before, people are just saying, do kids really need food? Do they really need to eat? As absurd as it seems right now, it's taken a lot of work and a lot of persistence, saying over and over again that this is an important thing. So persistence is really key. Don't expect it to be a sprint. It's a marathon. You're in it for a long time. For me, it's been 8 years so far, and I feel like I'm just starting. So in terms of fundraising, know your stuff, be persistent, keep asking, keep saying, how would you frame it? So I really have, like with our funders, we really have very often open conversations around what do you think we could do better here? What do you think we could do better there? And that's a kind of like culture that we've cultivated over time, where all the time we're being persistent and saying, how could we improve? How could we improve? Even learning the fundraising language is something that a funder can actually teach you. If you ask, how do you think I should have communicated that to you? For it, even if they say no, you can ask, how would it have sounded better to you if I said it, and what would have prompted a yes? So being persistent, and never, even if you get a no, continue with that conversation. I'm running out of time. And the last thing I would say is remain true to your values. Make sure that you're not getting funding for something you don't do. Make sure that you're getting money for something that you're passionate about, something that you can actually execute. Because the worst thing is that you want to get sidelined by someone with their agenda because they give you money. A lot of times you have to say, that is really nice, it's a good thing, but we don't do that. So if you want to fund that, I can recommend a couple of organizations that do that, but that's not us. So being very strict about what your values are and what your mission is really important. So for me, those are the 3 or 4 tips that I would really say are really important in terms of that have helped me my journey. But I'm excited to hear about the questions as they come along. And yeah, over to you, Roseanne.
Thank you, Awira. Let's hear from Roseanne.
Fantastic, thanks so much. Let me just share my screen, because I did put together a couple of quick slides. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah,
I can see it. Yes, I can see it.
Fantastic. All right, well, look, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I think similar to Warira, this is a topic that's actually really close to my heart as well. As you probably all know, globally, only around 3% of all capital in VC goes to female-founded businesses. And if you overlay young, as Warira said, and then Black, you've got what I call the kind of triple whammy of disadvantage. And it's just a fact. We only need to look at the existing AHL portfolio. And to be honest, I'm embarrassed to say that the majority of our businesses that we've backed are predominantly male and foreign founded businesses. So it's something that's, you know, a real issue and something that I personally feel really passionate about, not least also because I'm young, I'm female, I'm in a very male dominated industry, and I've really kind of spent my life struggling with a lot of, you know, the disadvantages of being young and female. For example, early on in my career, being called bossy, being called difficult, you know, classic kind of gender stereotypes, if I can call it that. So to myself, Aaron gave a very comprehensive introduction, so I probably don't need to say any more other than I'm also the daughter of 2 entrepreneurs, so I feel like entrepreneurship has always been in my blood. And I'm lucky enough also to be married to a Kenyan South African, so I feel very kind of connected and tied to the continent, having now spent close to 8-9 years in this part of the world. So just quickly about AHL, I don't want to dwell on this, but this is just to give you a quick snapshot. So we focus on investing in Africa. We invest across 3 sectors. You can see food and agriculture, energy, financial inclusion. We do both debt and equity. We do quite large ticket sizes. So I recognize that, you know, for some of you on this call, it might not be super relevant, but it might be something you're aspiring to. So the $500 to $5 million ticket size. We've been operational since 2007. We're all based in Nairobi. We took the bold decision, I feel, last year to have 100% of the team based in Kenya. We felt if we're trying to service Africa, we need to be in the market with a local team. So I'm actually the only expat on the team. So we've really focused on localizing, and ultimately we're focused on investing to both have positive impact but also returns. So when I was asked to reflect on my top tips, particularly drawing on what I've seen as some of the biggest challenges coming from entrepreneurs trying to raise capital, I came up with my first tip here. And I don't want you to read the full slide, it's really busy. If my one tip is just download this report and read it, because ultimately you have to understand who you are and what type of capital you're after. Too many times I just get emails, random emails from people saying, I've got an idea, will you fund me? If they're not even bothered to research and understand what type of investing AHL does, I'm not going to bother responding. So you really have to understand what kind of business you are right now, what kind of business maybe you want to be, and based on that, it really drives the types of funding that you'll be pursuing. And in this report, there's actually a really good segmentation of understanding which type of business you are and then what type of capital you can try and pursue at different stages of your growth. So obviously if you're early on, you might look for more kind of grant capital, seed investment, angel investment, and obviously as you scale, you might look for other types of capital. So when engaging with investors, you really just need to know what kind of business you are. You need to research, prepare when you speak to investors. I can tell you 100%, 200 emails speculatively to investors is a complete waste of time. You're far better off doing 10 very focused, researched emails to those investors who you know you're a fit with. Something else to say is, you know, I get so many emails. I'm probably not the best person to approach. So once you identify an investor, a grantee, a grantor who is a potential fit for your business, if you don't have a connection in, which is obviously your best way in, I'd actually suggest go on LinkedIn and try and find an analyst associate. They're much more likely to respond to your emails than I might be able to. And then really it's very much like what Warira said at the end, you know, it's got to be the right fit. So think of it a bit like dating. It's like a marriage, right? Like you could be in partnership with this investor for a long time. So you've really got to make sure it's the right type of funding for your business. So then again, similar, I think we're coming from a very similar perspective, albeit I'm coming from the investor perspective. You know, you've got to know your stuff. So you really focus on understanding your business. I completely agree. I think what I would also say is you've got to understand the language of investors and finance. And I do think this is a very typically kind of female anxiety. If I just reflect on my early career, I never studied finance at university. And I ended up getting this entry-level role in an investment firm. And I was terrified. The first 6 months, I just was like, what is going on? I don't understand anything that's being said. I then learned the language. I researched, I did courses, I understood what an EBITDA suddenly meant. And I realized actually it's not that difficult. It's just literally a foreign language. And I hate to say it, but if you're gonna have any credibility with a potential investor, you need to learn these types of words. And my one other tip on this would be, you know, maybe start thinking bottom up. So really understand your costs, move to understanding your gross margins, your revenues, then what type of capital expenditure do you need? What kind of financing do you need to be able to grow your business? And if you're stuck, find a financial advisor, a legal advisor that can help you really upskill around certain technical aspects of raising capital. Then tip number 3, and for me, I found this super important. You know, being a CEO, being a founder, it's really tough. It's really lonely. I completely agree with what Warira said. It's, you know, you're in it for the long haul, but it's a marathon, not a race. So the only way I feel I cope, even in my current role as CEO, is by having a really strong support network. And as you can see, I put a picture there of my mum. She was an entrepreneur herself. She continues to be one of my strongest and most important role models that I really lean on. But I also have a coach. I have a paid executive coach who really helps me. I'm part of multiple different entrepreneur and investor networks, again, super helpful. And then when I think about a support system, I'm really lucky. I've got really strong help. I've got a fantastic husband who's incredibly supportive. And I feel like that's really critical to all you ladies out there. Like, you know, make sure that you have a real advocate and champion in your partner. And just continue building that confidence. Because I think, you know, us as women, we're all inclined to just say, oh, no, we're not quite up to it. Oh, maybe not. I'm not sure. But men don't do that, right? So it's the classic, you've got to kind of fake it until you make it. And then the final thing I wanted to say before we go to Q&A is I found this report at the start of the year. So it's produced by Harvard Business School. And they did an analysis of leadership skills. And according to their research, women outscored men on 17 of 19 leadership qualities. So that may come as a bit of a surprise, but I think it's, you know, a good reminder that we should all have confidence that actually, you know, we're certainly capable, and we can definitely do it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roseanne. Thank you, Awira, for those wonderful briefs about your experiences and your tips to all on board. Once again, thank you for everybody who has joined us. And as we continue with Q&A, please feel free to drop your questions. We promise to try and answer as much as we can, and we might have to group some of them. So don't feel left out. And this is an ongoing conversation. Admittedly, it's a part of a bigger conversation that is taking place in different forums. We will try to cover as much ground as possible. So the next session is the next bit of this series is to go to Q&A, where we will be addressing questions. Our idea is to make this as interactive as possible. We will try to allocate the questions to the speakers based on their backgrounds. So there are people working in the backgrounds to try and do that. To Roseanne and to Awira, so I'll be posing questions to you. Feel free to pass on the question. Don't feel under pressure to answer, but yeah, if you can, please do. So I think I will start to give Roseanne some time to, to get a breather. I will pose the first set of questions to Wawira. And I think some of them that are coming through is, Wawira, what do you wish you knew early on in your journey on fundraising to fund your organization? And there's someone else here asking, how many grants do you apply for per year? And of those, how many become successful percentage-wise? And the third question is, as a small organization, do you have to work with auditors, etc., in the accounting process? So I'm not sure how much of that you have managed to capture, but I am happy to repeat the questions.
No, I think I'm good. I'll start with a question about what I wish I knew early on. I think that, part of what, when Roseanne was mentioning about being a woman, I think that one of the things that I wish I knew early on was that I am enough in terms of to raise money. So for me, I'm a solo founder. I don't have like someone to kind of hug me at night when I'm sleeping and crying, in terms of everything that's happening. So in terms of crying and in terms of how emotional it can be, I don't have someone to kind of like connect with that entirely. So I think that as one thing that I at the beginning is that I had a lot of self-doubt. I mean, I still have some self-doubt, but it's definitely much less now. And I think that it could have really saved me a lot of tears if I knew that I was enough, if I just believed that. So I think that one of the things that I would say is that, so I'll give a story, a short story is, my first trip to Silicon Valley for a fundraising trip, I was in, we were presenting our business plan to this potential investors, funders, and we were looking at, everyone was talking about their company, what they do, blah, blah, blah. And there was this person who had funded the entire institution, this university. He'd funded $25 million. And we all knew, like, he used to be this guy. Everyone knows that he's the rich guy, he's the guy with a lot of money. And I always used to feel kind of intimidated because I thought, he's so smart, he's so intelligent, he's done all this stuff, he's invested in this. And I remember presenting in front of him about our work, and he came to me after and he said, you know what, I think of all the people I've ever heard, you're the one who knows your stuff the most. And I didn't know that was a strength because I really, I love numbers. I love knowing the nitty-gritties of everything. And that is what has been helpful in my fundraising journey. So in terms of knowing that what you know is a strength, and your skills that you may think that are not a strength are actually a strength. In terms of how many grants we apply for versus how many we get, say at the beginning, so I can't really give a number of how many we apply for because it varies year to year. So at the beginning, I mean, our success rate was close to zero in terms of getting the funders because, and I should have mentioned, the first set of funding you get mostly is usually your friends and family. You don't email someone let's say Roseanne, who's an investor, and no one's ever heard of you, and she says, yeah, sure, I'll give you $500,000. You kind of have to have started. You don't start a company and start getting money immediately. The first people who invest in you are your friends and family. And so when we started getting outside funding, it was 2016 from 2012. And, our first fund, that was our first funder who was outside my family and friends circle. And that since then, now we've had higher success rates because also funders recommend you to other funders. The relationship that you keep with one kind of brings other people on board. So I'd say right now, maybe our success rate is about 70 to 80% because we have very good relationships, very good networks, very good people who, if we're applying for something very intentional, will tap someone in our network who knows the person who we're applying to, and will say, hey, just an FYI, we applied for this and things like that. So that has changed from 0 to around 70 to 80% in around 4 years, mostly because of maintaining good relationships and making sure that if you promise you're going to deliver something, you do deliver, or you over deliver, or you say why you didn't deliver. So being very open with funders and being, this is why we did this and this is why we did that, they feel more comfortable recommending you to others. In terms of systems, when someone was asking about auditing and setting up systems for a company, I think that from the initial stage, I think there's, a lot of people, they'll start a company, and whatever money you get, you've not set a salary for yourself. You're kind of like doing the way our parents used to do it. They have like a shop, and if the money they make that month, they go and use it. But I think that in terms of setting up systems, is put yourself on a salary, put everyone else on a salary, if you can afford to do that. But I started off with a really low salary at the organization. That way I knew the organization needs to make X amount of money for it to pay me and for it to pay X people. And then when it comes to that, you have to have accountability. So you have to have the financial systems. I mean, you can get auditors if you're running, we didn't get, I think our first audit was around 2014. So it started in 2012, around 2014. So kind of like, you don't have to rush some processes, but if you're going to start applying for outside funding, you're going to need things like an audit that you've already done. You're going to need finance systems within your organization. You're going to need to show how much are you getting paid as a CEO, how much is this person get, how many people do you have on the team, how much is your runway, and questions like that. So I think it's important to start thinking about systems early on, and also know that you don't start a company and get funding the next day, that it's a process. You have to show your credibility, you have to show, and especially if you have, as you said, the disadvantage of being like me, you kind of have to work harder, 3 times as hard, but it's very worth it, because then you put other people know that it's possible when more of us do it. Yeah.
Thank you, Awera, for that perspective. Moving on, Roseanne, there are a bit of questions here. I'm trying to see how to pose them to you. Quite a number, so I will probably just speak on these ones that have come through already. One of our attendees is asking, when is the right time to knock on doors for funding, or when is the right time to stop? And the other question, maybe a follow-on on that, would be, how is fundraising different for an NGO compared to, say, for a profit organization? And while you're at it, maybe you can mention suggestions of books or resources online for one starting their fundraising journey.
Sure, thanks very much. So I think when is the right time is a really difficult question, insofar as it really just depends what kind of business you are. And so I'm very happy for the slides that I put together to be shared. And I'd really encourage you guys to read this report that is online, because it essentially offers, albeit at a very high level, a bit of a roadmap for identifying what type of business you are, and then what type of funding you should be looking to secure at what point in the growth of your organization. So to give you maybe a specific example, if, let's say, you're running a hair salon, to what extent is that a really scalable, high growth business model, right? So if you came to AHL and said, I'm looking for $10,000 to buy some equipment to operate that business, I'm not the right type of capital. If you went to a commercial bank and said that, if you went to Stanbic Bank or KCB Bank, they would say, no way, right? So for that type of business, you might consider saying, okay, I have a certain number of clients who I have been cutting their hair in their homes. I now feel ready to actually set up a proper physical space. At that point, I completely agree with what Warira was saying. Your first port of call would most likely be friends and family. for essentially a personal loan, or you might go to, let's say, an equity bank or a microfinance institution to try and raise a small amount of capital in order to rent a premises and buy some more equipment. Now, if, for example, you were a business, let's say you had 50 hectares of land, you had already been growing some vanilla, it was yielding really well, you'd been selling it in the local market, but you really saw a potential opportunity to expand to export, right? And you wanted to obtain certification. You know, that is a completely different type of business. That would still be a relatively niche business, but there's certainly room for significant growth in terms of that business. So there you might actually be a good contender for accessing some grant funding, because you may be working with large numbers of smallholder farmers. You could also be well placed to indeed actually approach an equity bank, for example, to get a $10,000 loan for your working capital for that type of agribusiness. Now, some of you may have heard of a company called Twiga Foods in Nairobi. Like, that is another completely different example. That is a large venture, super high growth company. I mean, they have been growing at a 30% month-on-month revenue growth. So it gives you an idea of like the exponential growth potential. You know, that type of business is really well served to venture capital, impact investment capital, private equity capital. So I think my answer to you is you need to really understand what type of business you are and kind of what segment of the market you fall into. Then the question is, what stage are you at? And at that point, then you can look at what is the appropriate type of capital to be looking to raise. And I mean, to be clear, it might be that you don't need to raise capital. You know, my mother ran a business. It never got huge. It got to about, it was about $8 million of revenue in Europe. She was the sole shareholder. She just slowly but surely reinvested. About 10 years in, she took a bank loan, and she had a highly profitable business with no external equity investment and a small amount of bank debt financing. You know, not all businesses need capital. And I, if I'll be honest, I sometimes think, especially in Nairobi, there is a lot of hype around raising capital. There's a lot of hype of a little bit this, you know, Silicon Savannah, and actually it's not always appropriate. And maybe the final comment I just make on that is, if I take a step back, what I would say is that on the whole, you just need to have demonstrable data points, right? Even right at the start, like even if you want to try and raise some grant funding right at the start, you have to have something to show. So my strong advice is, if you've got a great idea, you've got to find a way of just doing something, a minimal viable product, a small pilot, just some data points that you can talk to. Because the reality is no one is just going to suddenly write you a check, even if it's, you know, for a small amount, even if it's just a grant, just for an idea. That's really unlikely, unless you've had the opportunity maybe to go through an accelerator type program, whereby through that process, the accelerator learns who you are, builds the trust, and I suppose the confidence in you and your potential. You know, maybe then they might write a check at the end of it. But the reality is most funders, whether it's grant funding or commercial capital, will be looking for data points. And so then, you know, NGO versus for profit, I mean, and Warira, I'd love your views on this as well. But I would say your pitch is quite different. I'd say NGOs more and more are shifting away from pure development and impact. I do think that the narrative around sustainability is becoming really important within grant funding. That is something that I would say has happened, particularly in the last five to 10 years, where sustainability has really crept in as an important dimension to grant funding. In my experience, when you're looking to raise grant funding, and I've supported a lot of grant funding capital raisers into portfolio companies, you know, they really want to understand the impact, right? The development story, your theory of change, they really want to understand your value for money. So for every dollar of grant funding that you're receiving, you know, what is the impact that you're having? They also often really want to understand the leverage. So, you know, for every dollar of grant funding coming in, how much private capital is coming alongside? That kind of goes quite closely towards the sustainability question. And I would say, unfortunately, and again, I'm interested in what Ura thinks, but it's about numbers. Often grant funders want large numbers. So, you know, you do need to get a little creative at times in your storytelling of the level of impact that you will have and the sheer kind of volume of beneficiaries. How that is different to more commercial capital, so maybe more like an impact investor like AHL, is we're going to be scrutinizing the financials really hard. So we want all the nice storytelling around the impact. We want to see that, and we are going to, you know, stress test it and try and validate it. But we're also going to want to make sure that you really understand what your unit economics is. We're going to really want to make sure that you understand when you get to break even. You know, so we're going to be quite tough on you in terms of the commerciality of your venture, as distinct maybe from an NGO. And then in terms of resources, I mean, that's tricky. I mean, I suspect Ariel for Africa would have lots of good ideas on that. You know, my general advice to people early on in their entrepreneurship journey is that there are a lot of accelerator programs out there, and I do think that they serve as a very good launch pad, because you get a lot of training and access to information. So a lot of, you know, what I was talking about before in terms of learning the language, what Aurora was saying about knowing your stuff, a lot of that is covered through accelerator programs. They can also direct you into the right directions in terms of potential funding. So yeah, I'd say that is a really good place to start. Other resources, I mean, there's a lot of stuff online these days. The Andy network, there was one question I saw around how do you find grant funding opportunities, and Andy publishes I think it's every 2 weeks, a full list of all the grant funding opportunities available, open to apply to. So that I would say is probably also quite a good place to look.
Thank you, Roseanne, for that. So Wawira, the next set of questions, I can see a lot of people, a lot of questions are coming through on how do you get started, how do you run a social enterprise, how do you make it viable. So I will combine a few questions. Some of them I'll paraphrase. So like one of our participants is asking, what do you do when you want to start a social enterprise in a discipline that is run by capitalism? I guess that's how do you balance the social enterprise aspect with capitalism aspect to be sustainable? And then I think there's a question here about how do you find information about possible funders for startups in agriculture / nutrition. I think partly, I think that Rosanna's answered a bit of that, but if you may please just address that as well. And then maybe the last question would be, do you start as profit-making business and then get towards the social aspects in order to please investors, or how do you go about it? And since the first two questions I've asked you, Awira, are sort of related, I will throw in the fourth question, which is what was, or rather, what is your most challenging issue in running?
Sorry, Aaron, I got dialed out a little bit. Could you just repeat the question?
Okay, I don't know where I lost you, but maybe I can finish this one and then maybe we re-ask the questions.
Just start the questions from the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you do when you want to start a social enterprise in a discipline that is run by capitalism? And then the next one is, where do you find information about possible funders for startups in agriculture / nutrition? I think that was partly answered by Roseanne, but please address it as well. And then I will throw in two more. Do you start as a profit-making business and then get towards the social aspect in order to please investors? And then the last one is, what is your most challenging issue in running your organization? Are you okay?
Thank you. Yeah, I got them. Sorry about that. I got dialed out a little bit. I think that the first question about what do you do, when you want to start a company in a system that's run by capitalism, and especially, thinking about the financial metrics, the financial way that essentially our world is run, and a lot of people start enterprises in a sort of revolt to that. You kind of like starting a non-profit because the old way isn't working, and then you have to play in the old way as well in terms of financial metrics, in terms of measuring things with outcomes that are specific towards financial returns. I think that for me, one of the things is thinking about how do you present the information in a way that makes sense to you and makes sense to the other person. So when we're speaking about fundraising as a language, is thinking about how do you, for example, make an appeal about growth through numbers, or an appeal about return through numbers, but still through lives. So there's a way that you can do that. For example, when we're raising money, which is something that I learned actually in Silicon Valley, you want to promise a return as the finance world would say, a return on investment. But for us, we're going to feed X number of kids with your investment. So that kind of return, you're still using that same language in terms of, the ROI is very clear. We work so hard. We have like a 6-year financial plan because our goal is to reach 1 million kids a day. So we know our unit economics, how much investment you need. This goes into that, and this is how you're going to, this is what you get for this investment. So for example, saying that is kind of like appeals to the financial world, but keeps you still grounded in what you want to accomplish. So you're saying for X amount of money, we will feed X number of kids at this cost because this is our cost. The more kids we feed, the more we lower the cost of our food because of economies of scale. So that kind of conversation is still in the financial world, but you're able to communicate it in this kind of environment. I think in terms of possible places to find, I think Roseanne mentioned a good place. I would say that, a lot of times it's, keep your eyes open. There are a lot of, look at organizations you look at. For example, for us, we have our partners on our website. So you can go look at our partners' websites and see if they're doing anything or something like that. So looking at that also really helps. And looking at announcements. I think at the beginning when you start your organization, it's a lot of cold applications. So you're just, applying, no one really knows what you do. The more networks you can get, the more events. These days are way more events than when we started. There's events like SoundCloud. There are events where, investors are coming to meet people. So you can organize meetings, be proactive. Don't just go there and turn up and wish and hope that you meet an investor. Go through their lists. A lot of them will post their lists if you're attending, will share their list of attendees. So email people, book meetings before, say, hey, I realize you're coming to this. Can we have a 30-minute meeting? And be very conscious about people's time. So don't have a meeting with an investor and kind of waste your time. Be very clear about how you want to have that conversation. In terms of the role about profit making and a social enterprise, I think for us, like we're a social enterprise. We haven't raised debt or equity, and that was something that was very clear for us. Once we went through actually an accelerator, so that was really good advice in terms of an accelerator is a good place to kind of start learning the language because they really, we went through an accelerator called GSBI, which I would 100% recommend. They also have online courses, which I think are free. I believe are 100% free if you get in. So having, accelerators that teach you the language, that teach you how to communicate, and then also teach you the types of funding that are there in terms of equity, do you want debt, and being very clear, because we've had opportunities, like we've turned out big money that could have been, debt or equity because that didn't align with our motives. And we've had, investors say, if only you were this, we could give you money. If only you were this. And I've had to say, well, we're not that. So if you know anyone else who could help fund us, that's great. But we're not going to change who we are. And also, it's like a dance. When when you said dating, that was a good analogy, because when you're dating, you kind of, some things you compromise, some things you don't. So you have to be very clear about the things you're willing to compromise, because I'm not saying never compromise anything. I'm saying that know what is important enough for you to keep and what not to. And I think the last question was the challenges, the most challenging thing. I think that truly, growing an organization is just the most alienating thing in the world, I think, in terms of mental health, in terms of being, alone. Most of the times, no one really understands the challenges that you go through, because the challenges are also very specific to your organization, specific to you. And I think that's one of the challenges that I've, had to really think about, is how do you create spaces where you feel supported? So being in, for example, fellowships, being, for example, in, communities of people who are like you, who are going through that, is really, really comforting. So I'm very, like, even during COVID-19, I've had a couple of calls with other fellows in fellowships I'm in, and I always feel better after that. So having, those kind of communities is really, really important. So I'd say that's one of the biggest challenges. If you don't have community, which I didn't at the beginning, it's a very big challenge.
Thanks, Wawira. Roseanne, I'll quickly jump to you, and probably this is maybe the last bit of this session. So I will combine these. Someone is interested in knowing what tips can you share on being a leader in a male-dominated VC world for women, and how do we include men in this conversation? I guess it's conversation about inclusion in VC world. And then what tips do you have for women who want to grow in their careers within that space? Yeah.
Great, and I'll try and be quick. I just wanted to make one follow-up comment though, in terms of what we were saying, which is you have to carve out time and prioritize building that network. And I think it's really easy when you get sucked into your job and what you're doing to not make time for it, but then your mental health suffers. So you really have to carve out that time. So, I mean, tips, working in a male-dominated environment. I mean, look, there's so many different things. I would say, grow a thick skin. At times, it's really frustrating. I would say it gets better as you get more senior. If I'm honest, people respond to positional authority. Now I'm a CEO, things have actually changed. Like, seriously. Like it's quite remarkable how attitudes do change. So it's not that helpful, but know that it does improve over time. I think that there's often advantages to being a woman. In certainly in investing, I found that I've not tried to emulate men. I've not tried to be like super tough and I don't know, the classic characteristics that come with men. And actually, I think sometimes, to my earlier point, because it's dating, because it's a marriage, actually, you really need to build very good relationships with the businesses and the entrepreneurs you're working with. And honestly, being able to pick up the phone and remember their kids' names and start any conversation with, how's your husband, how's your wife, how are your kids? Honestly, like, I actually think that builds for better relationships and better financial performance. So, my other tip would be, like, as women, I don't really think we particularly need to try and change our more like feminine style that we might have. Like, I actually think it served me quite well. But I and maybe the other thing I would just say is, I'm on the board, I'm on a number of different boards, and I hate to say it, but I do think that we have to work extra hard to be heard and listened to. And that's just reality. So I prepare incredibly well. I go to any meeting super, super well prepared. Because in the end, I can't, I often joke that you have I don't want to be ageist here, but like old white men who just like sprinkle the odd comment, right? And they can get away with that. I can't get away with that. I need to be on top of all the detail. So they would be some of my tips. In terms of including men in the conversation, you know, I think it's actually really important to include them in the conversation. And, you know, we've been very focused at AHL of making sure we've got quite a gender balanced team. So we've got a very high representation of women in investing at AHL, but we've also been keen to make sure that we've also got men and to include them in the conversations when we're having these types of conversations, so that they at least understand where we're coming from, but also to make sure they don't feel alienated by a lot of these conversations going on. And I mean, tips for men who want to be extra supportive of women, and this is something quite common on, let's say, boards, but it can kind of work in any forum, which is often women will say something and kind of, if the majority of the audience are men, they often won't listen. So if you either have the other woman in the room reaffirm what that woman said, or if you've got a male champion, he can reaffirm. So he can say, you know, further to what Warira said, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's a really good way of also a man becoming a kind of champion of women in the workplace. And in terms of tips for getting into the space, you know, I think that there's no substitution for having a deep and good technical knowledge, you know, especially in the impact investing space. Like, you do have to understand finance and accounting. Like, you just do. It's a language that you have to understand. Beyond that, I would say if you're starting out, internships, it's a really great way in. You know, other ways in is maybe trying to work for a social enterprise in a financy role and then trying to cross over. And then also try and network. Certainly in an AHL perspective, like we're quite receptive. So I think, like, you know, get to know some of my more junior colleagues, you know, that could be a good way to get your CV on the desk the next time we're doing an internship program. And then maybe just the final thing I just did want to know, which is one of the questions was just around accounting treatment of grants. And I think that that's really important that people understand that. So you just book it on your balance sheet as a liability, and you release the income into your income statement as and when you have the costs to offset that grant income. If you put it all in as income from day one, KRA will love you. They'll come and tax you.
Thank you for that tip. Anything to reduce the tax burden. Well, that's about it. We have to wrap it up. Our time is gone, and so just want to say massive thank you to Roseanne and to Awera for sharing tips and your experiences in your different undertakings. And we are very grateful. I am sure I speak for the majority of all the participants who are listening in. And as I said, this is a part of a bigger conversation, and we cannot, 1 hour is never, it's not really adequate time to have this conversation. But I mean, it's about looking for a takeaway, a nugget that you can take away from it. So to conclude, is just to say thank you so much for making time, everyone, to attend. And I would like to invite you for the third part of this series, which will be on 21st of August, from 6 to 7 p.m. Kenya time. And it is entitled Building a Disruptive Business Model. And it's part of this conversation where we will keep going. And registration details will also be shared by Ariel for Africa and Ghana Startup Network partner. So thank you, guys. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Roseanne. Thank you, Awira. And thank you, Ariel, for Africa, for organizing this. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.